So, good morning, everyone. It's a pleasure to be back and to be in the company of all of you this morning. It's a beautiful day, and this morning we have two esteemed speakers, Yeheskel Lando and Melina Rudman, and they will lead the prayer today. And I will start by passing the time and occasion to Yeheskel.
Thank you so much, Hans. Shalom, assalamu alaikum. Welcome to everyone this morning. We're brought together today at the start of a new calendar year, a new academic semester, and just before the start of a new chapter in our nation's history, as the Biden-Harris administration begins its daunting work of mending our social fabric after 4 years in which social divisions have grown more intense, debilitating, and alarming. We've all undergone trauma to our bodies and psyches with a pandemic that has claimed over 400,000 lives in this country, and to our spirits and consciences as our traditional norms of governance and social interaction have been undermined constantly and systematically. We're gathered together now to pray for healing and to embrace hope for our shared future. In the process, we'll look ahead to next week when Jews will celebrate the festival of Tu B'Shvat, the 15th day and full moon of the lunar month of Shvat, which Jewish tradition has identified as the new year of the trees. It's the Jewish Arbor Day, or in Arabic, Eid al-Shajara. I'll have more to say about this holy day in a few minutes. I'm delighted to be co-leading this community prayer gathering with my dear friend and colleague, Melina Rudman. She's a spiritual director, a writer, a gardener, and at present is the coordinator of the Doctor of Ministry program at Union Seminary in New York. Melina's recently published book, a spiritual gem, is called Sacred Soil. Here it is, A Gardener's Book of Reflection. Melina, thank you so much for joining us today. Would you like to say a few words about yourself before we launch into our service?
Sure. Thank you, Yeheskel. Good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
I want to
Morning.
thank you all for being here. And, thank you, Yeheskel, for inviting me. I am a spiritual director and a gardener and a writer, as he said. In me, especially as I age, I turned 62 on Saturday, and as I age, I am finding that my life is twining itself together in ways that it didn't when I was a young woman, when I was going in all different directions. And now those strands of life are all weaving together very intentionally into something that I hope is whole and that I hope is holy. And that's really all I have to say.
Well, many thanks, Melina. We're blessed to have you with us. One chapter of your wonderful book is called Trees, and we'll have the pleasure of hearing you read some passages from that chapter. Before that, I want to look at how we humans have thought of trees, both as symbols or metaphors and as actual living beings. Melina and I have chosen this theme for our shared time of prayer and contemplation because we believe that we have much to learn from trees and from how our lives are enmeshed with theirs. We know scientifically that we would not have oxygen to breathe if it were not for trees, so we are literally dependent on them. Too many of us ignore or downplay their vital significance for our global ecosystem as we see commercial interests destroy forests and in so doing, endanger our very survival on this fragile planet. Researchers are learning more about how trees and forests cooperate with and support one another, even across species, and how they share information as social beings connected through vast underground networks of roots and fungi. I strongly encourage you to watch the TED Talk featuring forestry scientist Suzanne Simard, who was the subject of a December 6th New York Times Magazine cover story, The Social Life of Forests, which I also recommend. If we look at the Hebrew Bible, we encounter various teachings that draw comparisons between trees and the moral and spiritual characteristics of human beings. So let me start the screen share. A classic reference is in Deuteronomy chapter 20. And in the context of regulations limiting the destruction inflicted in a military campaign, the Torah teaches that fruit-bearing trees are to be spared during a battle. For the human being is like a tree of the field, the text says, Ki ha'adam eitz hasadeh. In the Psalms, the morally righteous are compared to different species of trees, the date palm and the cedar. And in the book of Proverbs, the Torah and the righteous are each called a tree of life, Eitz Chaim. Those latter verses recall the biblical account of the primordial Garden of Eden, in which two named trees figure prominently in the story. Eitz Chaim, the tree of life, and Eitz Hadat, the tree of knowledge of both good and evil. The tree of life is also a central image and motif in Kabbalah, the Jewish mystical tradition. And with all this in mind, I invite Melina to guide us into a contemplative frame of mind and spirit by sharing with us some passages from her book. Please, Melina.
Thank you. So I'm going to read three sections from the essay called Trees. And the lead into this first one is remembering some of my earliest memories as a child around trees. And then I come to this. I have a thing for trees. They are woven into all the memories of my life. I plant them, tend them, and sit in their shade. I have been known to hug them. I cry for them. I listen to them as they speak their strange, murmuring language of sighs and rustles, creaks, scents, and colors. I have leaned on their strength. My arboretum, also known as my yard, has chestnut, apple, pear, linden, birch, Japanese maple, elder, cherry, dogwood, spruce, and oak trees. The oak trees are gifts from the squirrels who stored acorns and forgot where they were. Unfortunately, the squirrels hid their acorns in my vegetable patch. So I have dug the oak seedlings up and potted them until I find them good homes. Their parent was taken down in its prime by a neighbor. I cried from my living room window as I watched life and beauty fall without reason to a power saw and wood chipper. Trees are matter made into memory. Their rings carry the history of their lives in narrow and wide bands of growth, feast and famine mapped into their interior lives, records we are not privy to until the tree falls or is felled. They live lives on a different scale than our own. On a trip to Devon, England, I came across a strand of ancient, sweet chestnut trees growing in the gardens of Dartington Hall. Dartington traces its history back to the Norman conquest of England in 1066. The hall was built in the 12th century by a half-brother of King Richard II, and later was part of the wedding gift Henry VIII gave to his sixth wife, Catherine Parr. Today, it is known for its beautiful gardens and history. The sweet chestnuts, planted in a row 500 years ago, are part of the gardens on the ridge overlooking the still intact tilting field. As I walked toward those trees, I was aware of their size and age and my own. The tree trunks twisted and writhed, peeled and merged to support the immense canopy and the flocks of noisy magpies that nested to raise their chicks in the immense branches. I felt called to the hallowed places inside the living trees, places large enough for a human being to stand and sit. And I accepted the tree's invitation to be with them. I chose a tree toward the center of the stand, where fewer human sounds would reach me, and stepped inside. Immediately, I was surrounded by a cool, dry stillness. I felt the weight of branches above me, though I had no part in supporting that weight. I sat on the dry earth where once a tree's heartwood had formed and then died and crumbled to sawdust. I rested my shoulders against the back of this living cavern and let myself relax into a life other than my own. I don't know how long I sat there, only that time's passage was measured by light and shadow rather than numbers on a clock. The tree paid no more mind to me than it would have paid to a squirrel or spider seeking shelter in it. I knew that all around me, and without a thought about the middle-aged woman sitting at its center, the tree was drawing nutrients up from the remains of the primeval forest that had covered the land long before people cut down the trees and planted crops, while high above me, its leaves collected sunlight and turned it into food, a miracle if ever there was one. Scientists are finally starting to understand the consciousness of trees. They communicate with one another through mycorrhizal networks, root systems sensing when another tree in their community is struggling or under attack from insects. They shunt nutrients from one to another and send out distress signals that allow other trees to prepare for threats from other creatures. I imagine they must have quite an alarm system when it comes to human beings. Our local trees have taken a beating in recent years, due mostly to climate change and lack of human understanding and planning. Almost a decade ago now, I remember Bob Maxon, a meteorologist on Connecticut's NBC channel, saying, "Some computer models are predicting a major snowstorm next week." That particular model was an outlier, and no one really believed it. It was only the third week of October. Many trees were still in full leaf. When the snow began to fall after 9 o'clock on the night of October 29th, 2011, it came down in fat, heavy flakes sticking to everything. We heard the first cracks and thumps of branches and trunks collapsing around 10 that night. The power was out before midnight, and it did not come back on until the afternoon of November 5th. Most towns in the state canceled trick-or-treating that year. There were too many downed trees and power lines for anyone to be safe. We lost our last big maple tree in that storm. All winter long, the Connecticut landscape looked like the Ardennes forest after the Battle of the Bulge. Trees looked like matchsticks, splintered and ruined. It wasn't until the next May that new growth covered the scars. Exactly 12 months later, in October of 2012, a late season tropical storm formed in the warm waters of Jamaica and began moving north. Fueled by warming oceans, the storm achieved hurricane status on October 24th. Dubbed Superstorm Sandy, she came ashore in New Jersey as a Category 2 hurricane, but what she lacked in wind speed, she made up for in size and surge. While New York City and New Jersey suffered a direct hit, Connecticut's shoreline also flooded, and the state recorded wind gusts up to 85 miles per hour. Our trees, already weakened and hurting, fell with the rain. 30% of the state's population lost power for days. Our state's response to these dual disasters was not to improve the electrical grid or bear down on planning for and combating climate change and its chaos. Rather, municipalities across the state began taking down trees, damaged trees, healthy trees, big trees, little trees, any tree within 20 feet of a highway, byway, or power line was selected and removed. Connecticut routes 2 and 9 look like clear-cut zones for timber interests. Tree-lined Elm Street in Rocky Hill, which had lost its namesake elms to Dutch elm disease years ago, now lost its giant shade maples and oaks. Even now, 7 years after Sandy's destruction, the state highway crews still cut to stumps any trees daring to grow near Interstate 91. The landscape looks butchered. If we are going to awaken to new consciousness, I hope we do it soon. It seems it is human nature to blame victims for their own suffering, even when the victims are trees. even when having more trees is part of the solution to lowering the level of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, even when lowering output is vital to our own survival as a species. The ancient people of Easter Island cut down every tree that grew there, and then they themselves died out. We should pay attention and learn our lesson. We evolved long after the trees created a world hospitable to life on land. We will not long survive without their beauty and strength, their ability to store carbon and emit oxygen, the fruit they bear, and the other creatures they provide life for. We must learn to listen again to the earth. And if Yeheskel, if you'll come to the Claire Dubois slide. Oops, sorry. Sorry. Oh, I think you're on mute, Yeheskel.
Thanks. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good. Okay. So next Wednesday and Thursday, Jews will be celebrating the festival of Tu B'Shvat, the New Year of the Trees, which precedes by 2 months the festival of Passover, which begins at the full moon of the month of Nisan. We all know that Passover, Pesach in Hebrew, marks the anniversary of the Israelites' exodus from slavery in ancient Egypt. That week-long festival affirms and celebrates the liberating power of God in the social and political realm. And it coincides with the burst of new life and energy associated with springtime. In contrast, Tu B'Shvat falls in the middle of winter, a strange time to mark a new annual cycle for trees. But it's the same time when almond trees throughout the Holy Land are resplendently full of pink and white blossoms. During my 24 years in Jerusalem, I loved to walk at this time of year through an enchanted valley or wadi near my home, which I called Emek Hashkediot, the Valley of the Almond Trees. The emergence of almond blossoms in the exterior world is one reason our rabbinic sages chose this time of year for Tu B'Shvat. There's another reason, one that has mystical resonances for our interior lives. At this time, when the weather is often chilly and rainy in the Middle East, the sap starts rising from the tree roots, beginning the organic process that will result in the buds and blossoms of spring. This aspect of life can't be perceived by our senses, yet we know that it is happening. The lesson in this dimension of Tu B'Shvat is that in order to prepare ourselves for an exodus from the status quo and the forging of a new social reality in the outer world, we need to connect our own roots and be nourished by the spiritual, to connect to our own roots and be nourished by the spiritual sap that flows through our bodies and our consciousness as we grow, like trees and other plants, toward the light. In our case, the divine light that the Holy Quran describes in Surat An-Nur, the chapter of light. As a way of deepening our spiritualities on Tu B'Shvat, the Jewish mystics in the Galilee town of Safed or Tzfat in the 16th century created a special messianic meal for this tree festival. Like the Passover Seder, it has 4 cups of wine or grape juice, but their composition follows a sequence that parallels the flow of the seasons. First, a cup of white wine or juice, symbolizing the snow and the barren trees of winter. Then a second cup with white wine and a bit of red wine, symbolizing the buds of early spring. Then a third cup with half white and half red wine or juice, symbolizing the blossoms of late spring, aside from the almond trees. And finally, a fourth cup with only red wine or juice symbolizing the lush green leaves of summer. In between these 4 cups are 3 courses of fruits and nuts from trees that are native to the Holy Land. The first course is made up of fruits and nuts with an outer rind or shell, so you have to remove that exterior covering to feast on the inside. The second course consists of fruits with a soft exterior and a hard pit inside. Dates and olives are usually chosen for this. In all cases, these are fruits and nuts associated with the Holy Land. The first one we saw almonds and other nuts along with pomegranates. And then between the 3rd and 4th cups of wine or juice, we feast on a 3rd course, which is fruits that can be consumed whole, especially grapes and figs. Why grapes and figs? Well, at least twice in the books of the Hebrew prophets, as an emblematic symbol of messianic peace and security, we read that everyone will sit under their vine and their fig tree, and no one will be terrified or terrorized. This prophetic vision links to the overall message of the Tu B'Shvat Seder. We're invited to transcend our fears through faith, mustering our courage to overcome the impediments that we face. For the sequence of courses reflects 3 stages of human growth in the face of fear. In the first phase or course, as we bundle up to stay warm in winter, we protect ourselves from harm with the character armor that resembles an outer shell or rind. We can go back up. Nope. Okay. Then after drinking a 2nd cup of promise, we can lower our guard enough to relate to others with congeniality, shedding our outer shield, but retaining a hard heart like a pit, determined not to let anyone get close enough to break our hearts through pain and grief. Finally, when we bolstered our faith sufficiently to reach a stage of total or near total fearlessness, we can take greater risks and become more vulnerable, trusting that if we are totally consumed like a grape or a fig, God will remain our guardian and protector no matter what happens. As the psalmist proclaims in chapter 23, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you, God, are with me. I find this Tu B'Shvat Seder to be a powerful spiritual practice when shared with others, an interpersonal act of faithfulness, an aesthetically and gastronomically rich way to affirm our confidence in providential care, protection, and empowerment. And as we move forward together through a time of great physical anxiety caused by a global pandemic and a period of social turbulence, strife, and uncertainty, we have the roots of our faith, the sturdy trunk of our families and communities, our outstretched hearts and arms, which are the branches through which we connect with others, in order to bear and share the fruits of our common labor toward a more perfect national union and a more just, peaceful, and secure world for all. And in that spirit, I invite Melina to recite for us a poem written by Claire Dubois, who's active in a network called Tree Sisters. And her surname Dubois is most fitting since in French it connotes a woodworker or someone who lives in the woods. Melina, can you say a word or two about Claire Dubois and Tree Sisters and then read her poem for us?
Better. So Claire Dubois is someone I have followed online for several years now. She founded a group called Tree Sisters.
Oh, but he froze. Whoa, but he froze. Hello.
It looks like Melina froze.
Yes, yes, Melina, it's not just me, huh? Melina is frozen. Whoops. Okay, well, until she comes back, I guess I will read the poem. Where trees breathe, new life is born. Where each branch reaches out to me, I know myself held in the arms of purest generosity. Where the leaves fall, I'm blessed with a giving back that nourishes the roots of my soul. For the trees reflect, you back, Melina? No. For the trees reflect who and how I can be, standing tall, true, honest, and undeniably me. Unafraid to love, to give, to share, and to bend. So I bless the forests as I learn from them. All right, I hope Melina will come back. In the meantime, we've put together some questions for your own reflection, and we'll have now a minute, a little more than a minute of silence to let you absorb these questions, meditate on them, maybe write one down that specifically speaks to you and you can think about it later. So let's have a moment of silence and we'll come back. And now, finally, as we prepare to mark the end of a 4-year period of collective darkness and welcome the dawn of a new era ushered in by a new administration in just an hour and a half. Let's recite together. Please unmute yourself. Let's recite together this prayer for our beloved country.
I can't read it.
Okay.
Our God
God,
and God of our ancestors, with mercy, accept our prayer on behalf of our country and its governing officials. Pour out your blessing on this land, upon its inhabitants, upon its leaders, judges, and officers in all branches of our government, who faithfully devote themselves to the needs of the public. Help these leaders and our fellow citizens understand the justice you have decreed, so that peace and security, happiness and freedom will be the natural fruits of our shared tree of life. O God, we pray that your spirit be awakened within all the inhabitants of our country. Uproot from our hearts hatred and malice, jealousy and strife. Plant love and companionship, peace and goodwill among the many peoples and faiths that comprise our nation. Grant us the knowledge to judge justly, the wisdom to act with compassion, and the understanding and courage to root out poverty, racism, other oppressive systems of thought and action from our land. May it be your will that our country blessing all who dwell on earth, and may you guide all peoples towards friendship, freedom, speedily fulfill the vision of your prophets. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. And let us say, Amen.
Amen.
Thank you all for being part of this contemplative and prayerful gathering. And I wish you all, on
Perfect.
Melina's behalf too, a gratifying spring semester, a happy new year, and a happy Tu B'Shvat, Chag Le'ilanot Sameach.
Thank you.
Thank you. Enjoyable, very educational.
Thank you.
And Yeheskel, this is Melina. I'm back.
Oh, you're back.
I don't know.
God.
My computer just shut off in the middle of, just shut off.
I don't know. Okay,
Sorry about that.
that's
So
all.
Thank you.
thank you again,
Thank you.
Yeheskel and
Thank you.
Melina, for deep
Lovely.
reflection. And for next week, we will have another community prayer. Return back to noon as usual with Dr. Joel Kaminski and Dr. Joel Lore. So please join us again next week if you can.
Smith College. Smith College.
And
Thank you,
now, if you want to stay for the Holy Ground Coffee Hour, perhaps reflecting on the questions posted by Yeheskel and Melina, or just sharing about each other's life, feel free to stay and chat with one another until another 30 minutes. Have a great week ahead, everyone.